The room was still. Cameras rolled silently. Heads of state from across Africa sat upright, watching. A golden banner stretched across the summit wall. Pan-African unity. The future is now. But what came next shattered everything. The new ECOWAS president, a stern man in a navy suit with steely eyes, stood up slowly. The microphone crackled. Millions were watching live. "Ibrahim Traoré," he said coldly, "your time is up." Traoré didn't move. "You will step down or face the consequences. ECOWAS will not tolerate insubordination. Not from you, not from Burkina Faso." The silence was unbearable. Not even the translators breathed. A young woman in the audience dropped her pen. Somewhere, a baby cried. African youth across the continent stared at their screens, stunned. In a private security room in New York, Donald Trump sat upright in his chair, squinting at the feed. What the hell did he just say? The ECOWAS leader repeated it again, slowly. "Step down, or face the consequences." Traoré finally lifted his head. His voice wasn't angry, it was calm. But he didn't speak. Not yet. The world waited. The room was suffocating with tension. Something was coming. No one was ready. Trump leaned forward. His aides scrambled to connect him. "Put me on. Now," he barked. "Live." Burkina Faso's captain Ibrahim Traoré remained still. His face was calm, unreadable. But inside, everyone knew. Something was building. The ECOWAS president folded his arms, waiting. His threat still hanging in the air like smoke after gunfire. Suddenly the summit's massive screens flickered. A new feed came in. Live from a secure U.S. satellite room. Trump's face appeared slightly distorted by transmission lag. "I have a few things to say," Trump said, staring directly into the camera. People in the hall gasped. "This summit, this little ultimatum game, it's a joke," he said with a grin. "Africa needs structure, and Captain Traoré has been a problem." Traoré didn't blink. Trump smirked. "You want freedom? Be careful what you wish for." Some African leaders in the room looked down, ashamed. Others, curious. But still, Traoré didn't respond. His silence was louder than thunder. Suddenly, a young reporter whispered to her cameraman, "Is he scared?" But Traoré gently reached for his microphone. He adjusted it. And then, he spoke. What he said would break the internet in minutes. Traoré's fingers were steady as he leaned into the mic. The lights above cast a soft glow on his uniform. You could hear the heartbeat of the room. He looked straight at the ECOWAS president, then up at Trump's face on the screen. "My name is Captain Ibrahim Traoré," he began, "and I do not kneel." A gasp swept the hall. "I was born in a country that was looted, shamed, and left in pieces. We rose. We bled. We fought for air." He turned toward the crowd. "Today you say step down or face the consequences." He paused. His eyes began to glisten, but he didn't cry. "You want to know about consequences? Look at our children starving. Look at our lands stripped bare. You think Africa is a playground for threats?" The room went deadly still. "I do not lead Burkina Faso because I want power. I lead because our dignity was sold, and someone has to buy it back." People began to whisper. Some ministers clenched their fists. A woman in the crowd wiped a tear. Trump's smile began to fade. Traoré looked back at the camera. "And no man, African or American, will silence me." As the ECOWAS president stood firm in his threat, murmurs filled the room. But Traoré didn't flinch. He remembered. He remembered the village boy who once asked him, "Captain, why are we poor if we have gold in our soil?" Traoré had no answer. Now he stood not just for Burkina Faso, but for every child born into chains they didn't deserve. The ECOWAS leader continued, "You defied sanctions. You turned away foreign forces. That was a mistake. He raised a paper. This document, signed by member states, will declare your leadership illegitimate if you do not step down. A few African presidents avoided eye contact. Others nodded. Cameras zoomed in. One reporter whispered, "This is the end of Traoré." Suddenly, the screen at the summit's center split again. Trump appeared, live. He didn't wait for permission. His face looked serious. "You people think you can just kick the US out and still survive?" Trump said. "You need order, you need control, you need America." The crowd murmured again. Traoré's jaw tightened, but he still didn't respond. Not yet. The storm was only beginning. In the heart of Burkina Faso, people gathered around old TVs, smartphones, radios. Farmers paused in the fields. Mothers held their children close. Soldiers stood in quiet formation outside barracks. They were all watching. Not a word from Traoré yet. Inside the summit hall, the ECOWAS president turned to Trump's image and said, "America's concern is appreciated, but this is an African affair." Trump smirked. "If you fail to deal with him, we will." Traoré finally raised his eyes. He pressed the mic. "My people are watching," he said softly. He looked directly into the camera. His voice was slow, clear, measured. "I will not run." People in the audience leaned forward. The hall was frozen. "I will not be forced into the shadows because I chose to stand with my people. If leadership means surrendering Africa's soul, then I'd rather be a farmer with dignity than a president with chains." You could hear breathing now, and crying. Even some delegates from ECOWAS looked shaken. One whispered, "He's not speaking like a politician, he's speaking like a father." And still, Traoré wasn't done. He turned to face the African leaders directly, and what he said next made a president drop his pen. Traoré's voice grew stronger. "I sat with many of you in closed rooms," he said. "You clapped when I removed foreign troops. You nodded when I said no more looting of African soil." Now his voice trembled, not with fear, but pain. "But here you are, threatening me in front of the world. For what? For saying Africa should belong to Africans." The hall remained deadly quiet. A South African diplomat looked away, uncomfortable. A Ghanaian delegate wiped his eyes. Traoré continued, "This is not just about me. This is about fear. Some of you fear losing your comfort. Others fear losing your Western praise." He stepped away from the mic, but then he paused and turned back. "If your silence buys you safety, then wear it. But don't ask me to sell my people's future to keep you comfortable." Suddenly, Trump's voice blared again. "This guy thinks he's a revolutionary, but he's just making trouble." Traoré smiled just slightly. "I'm not trying to make trouble, Mr. Trump," he said. "I'm trying to wake Africa up." And in that moment, social media exploded. Millions of Africans started posting one word: awaken. As the global summit buzzed with reactions to Traoré's calm defiance, one man in the audience sat stiff. President Diatta of a neighboring country. He had history with Traoré, but no one knew what he hid in his jacket pocket: a sealed letter. 3 months earlier, Traoré had written to him, privately. In the letter, he begged for help in building a Pan-African alliance, not for power, but for food systems, clean water, and protection from foreign military bases. "We must build our own future," the letter read. "Our children deserve better than waiting for handouts." Diatta never replied, and now here he was, signing Traoré's political death sentence. The guilt gnawed at him. On his screen, Twitter was exploding. Hashtags like "Stand with Traoré" and "Africa is awake" were trending worldwide. Meanwhile, Donald Trump leaned into his mic again. "This man is dangerous," Trump snapped. "If he continues like this, he'll start a wildfire. ECOWAS must take control." The ECOWAS president nodded slightly. But as the summit prepared to issue an official motion to remove Traoré did something unexpected. He pulled a small item from his jacket, a worn-out photo, and the room went silent again. Traoré held the photo up. It was faded, the corners were torn, but every person watching could see the face. A little girl, eyes full of wonder, braids neat, skin dark and glowing. "This," Traoré said slowly, "is Amina." His voice cracked slightly, but he held firm. "She was 5. I met her while visiting a camp for families displaced by conflict. Her father had been taken. Her school was burned. But she still smiled at me." The room was still. I asked her what she wanted to be. She said, "A teacher." He paused. 3 weeks later, I found out she died. No medicine, no food, just forgotten. The camera panned to the crowd. Some delegates looked down. One woman covered her mouth. "I didn't come into power because I wanted a title," Traoré continued. "I came because children like Amina needed someone to speak when the world was silent." He gently returned the photo to his pocket. Trump was now visibly frustrated. "Emotional stories don't change geopolitics," he said coldly. Traoré turned. "No," he said, "but maybe they can change hearts." And just like that, a wave of tears swept the audience. This was no longer politics. This was human. Traoré looked around the hall. His voice softened. "There's something else I want to show you." He reached into his pocket again and pulled out a small, rusted piece of metal. It was a broken chain link. "This," he said, "was found buried behind an old French military post in Burkina Faso. Our ancestors wore these. They were whipped, starved, sold, and yet, here we are, still being told what to do, still being threatened when we say no." Gasps filled the hall. A young ECOWAS aide whispered, "He's reminding us." Traoré held up the chain. "We were taught to obey, to follow orders, even if it meant destroying our own." He placed it gently on the table before him. "I carry this not out of anger, but memory, so I don't forget who I serve." Trump's tone turned harsh. "You're stirring rebellion, Captain. That's dangerous." Traoré looked up again. "No, Mr. Trump, I'm stirring truth." The camera zoomed in on his eyes, clear, strong, but full of pain. He wasn't just a soldier. He was a mirror reflecting a continent's wounds, and the world was watching. For the first time, many weren't just watching with their eyes. They were watching with their hearts. As the summit dragged on, whispers filled the corridors outside the main hall. In a private side room, 2 ECOWAS ministers argued quietly. One of them, Minister Adewale from Nigeria, was shaking with rage. "You lied," he hissed. "You said this was just a warning. You didn't say we were planning a military move." The ECOWAS president looked cold. "I did what I had to do." "But he's not the enemy," Adewale snapped. "He's the only one standing for something real." The president glared. "No, he's standing in the way." Meanwhile, inside the main hall, Traoré sat alone, staring at the floor. Cameras were off during a short break, but the tension hung thick in the air. One of his aides leaned in and whispered, "Sir, your mother is watching from Ouagadougou. She says she's proud." Traoré nodded faintly, but his hands were shaking. Not from fear, but from pressure. The pressure of carrying a continent's hope. Suddenly, one delegate from Senegal stood up. "Why are we doing this?" he asked the room. "When did we become servants to outsiders?" No one answered. But something was shifting. For the first time, someone else was starting to speak. The break ended. Cameras turned back on. The summit was live again. The ECOWAS president adjusted his tie and cleared his throat. "The motion to strip Captain Ibrahim Traoré of recognition will now proceed." "Stop." The word cut through the hall like a blade. Traoré stood slowly. His eyes were red, not from anger, but from exhaustion. "I did not come here to beg for validation," he said. The camera zoomed in. "I came to speak for those who have no microphone, for children who sleep hungry, for farmers who till land they can't own, for mothers who bury their sons in silence." His voice cracked. "If being free means standing alone, then I accept it." He stepped back. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the ECOWAS president slammed a paper on the podium. "Enough. We declare you removed." People gasped. Traoré didn't move. Suddenly behind him, a security officer walked forward. For a terrifying second, it looked like he would arrest Traoré. But instead, he saluted. Then he turned and walked away. It was a small act, but it meant everything. One man refused to betray his conscience. And outside the building, Burkina Faso was rising. Thousands had gathered in Ouagadougou. Old women, barefoot children, young men, students, all waving handmade signs. "No to foreign puppets. Traoré is our voice. We stand with our captain." Videos went viral. People in Ghana, Mali, Niger, South Africa, everyone was watching. One video in particular broke the internet. A barefoot boy, no older than 8, stood on a wooden box holding a cracked radio. "I heard what they said about you, Captain," he shouted. "But we are still here, we still believe." The crowd roared. Inside the summit hall, Traoré's aide showed him the clip. For the first time in hours, he smiled. He didn't cry, but his eyes glistened. He stood back up, faced the cameras, and said just one sentence. "You can strip me of titles, but you cannot strip me of purpose." Even ECOWAS delegates began to pause. In the crowd, one woman whispered, "This is not a man we can break." And back in New York, even Trump paused. "He's dangerous," he muttered. "But not in the way I thought." The room was no longer just watching a man. They were watching a movement. And it had just begun. That night, long after the summit recessed for a vote, Traoré sat alone in his hotel room. He hadn't eaten. He hadn't slept. Outside, protests were growing. Inside, he felt the weight of a continent on his chest. Suddenly, the room phone rang. He froze. Only a few people had this number. He answered. "Captain," said a shaky voice. "It's me, Minister Adewale." Traoré sat up. Adewale continued. "They're planning something. It's not just political anymore. They want to remove you by force." Traoré's heartbeat slowed. "Tomorrow, after the session, they'll push to invoke emergency powers. You'll be labeled a regional threat. Once that's signed, they can send troops." For a few seconds, Traoré said nothing. "Why are you telling me this?" he finally asked. Adewale hesitated. "Because today, when I saw the photo of that little girl, I remembered my daughter." He hung up. Traoré sat back in his chair, staring at the dark ceiling. Even inside the system, someone had cracked. Even inside the silence, a voice had risen. But time was running out. And now, Traoré had to choose. Fight back with fury, or stand firm with grace. The whole world would see his decision tomorrow. The summit resumed the next day in a sealed room called the Storm Room, a private chamber reserved for emergency action. Inside, only top ECOWAS leaders sat. No cameras, no press. Documents were on the table. Trump was on live satellite feed, smirking. Traoré was allowed to attend, but not speak. The ECOWAS president opened a folder marked Regional Security Motion. "If passed," he said, "this will give us power to isolate and remove Traoré, by any means necessary." Silence. Then a hand rose. It was the Senegalese delegate, the same man who had stood up 2 days earlier. He spoke clearly. "I will not sign." Gasps. One by one, other hands went up. I refuse, said the delegate from Mali. Niger stands with Burkina Faso, another added. The ECOWAS president's face grew pale. Trump's voice cut in. Are you people really siding with this rebel? Traoré finally stood. I'm not a rebel, he said quietly. I'm a reflection of everything Africa has buried. But now, it's surfacing. The ECOWAS president slammed the table. You're dividing us. No, Traoré said. I'm revealing us. And just then, something happened outside. A sound. Singing. 1,000 voices, louder than any vote. Outside the storm room, thousands had gathered. But they didn't come to fight. They came to sing. It began with one mother, then a child, then hundreds, now thousands. Their song echoed up through the walls. We are not afraid. We are not for sale. Africa is rising. We will not kneel. Inside, even the most hardened delegates looked shaken. Traoré stepped toward the window and saw them. Elders holding hands, children standing barefoot in the sun, soldiers silently watching with tears in their eyes. His voice wavered. I did not plan this, he said. I didn't call them, but they came. Because they have nothing left but their voice. One older delegate whispered, I haven't seen this since Independence Days. Trump's face on the screen was now stone cold. This is not democracy, he said. Traoré turned to him. No, he replied. This is awakening. Suddenly, the ECOWAS president's hand trembled. The motion was still on the table, but no one dared to touch it, not when Africa itself was standing outside the door. Inside the summit, the singing outside grew louder. Leaders stood frozen. Some were shaking, others in tears. But the ECOWAS president, face flushed with pressure, raised his voice one last time. This is not how nations are run, he said. Emotion does not build governments. Traoré stepped forward. It builds people, he replied gently. Trump's face flashed cold on the screen. This is madness, Trump said. You'll regret this. The world doesn't move by feelings. Traoré stared into the camera, not with anger, but with deep strength. You speak of regret, Mr. Trump. But do you know what it means to bury a child with no name? Do you know what it means to walk 10 kilometers for water? Or to work all day and still sleep hungry? He turned to the leaders. Regret is letting fear speak louder than truth. Regret is watching a nation suffer and calling it diplomacy. The hall was silent. Traoré took a breath. I may lose this chair, but I will not lose myself. And I will not lose my people. A tear rolled down the cheek of one ECOWAS minister. They knew it. This wasn't just a leader speaking. It was Africa's heart. The ECOWAS president reached for the document, one signature away from removing Captain Ibrahim Traoré. But before he could write, something happened that stopped the room cold. One by one, the lights began to turn off, not by power failure, by choice. Delegates began unplugging microphones, closing folders, pushing back chairs. We will not vote today, said the delegate from Ghana. We need to listen, added the one from Liberia. Trump's voice crackled in confusion. What's going on? You had him. He was done. But nobody answered him. Even the ECOWAS president slowly placed his pen down. Traoré stood still, shocked by the silence. Then, from the corner of the room, the oldest delegate, a former freedom fighter, stood with a cane in his hand. I've seen men fall for money, he said, and I've seen men rise for truth. He looked directly at Traoré. Today, son, you've reminded us who we were before they put ties on our necks. He turned to the table. And I say, no more votes today. Let Africa breathe. The room echoed with quiet agreement. Traoré didn't smile. He bowed his head, and for the first time he wept, not from weakness, from relief. The summit never resumed. That final image, Ibrahim Traoré, head bowed, tears silently falling, was shared 67 million times in 3 days. Social media called it the tear that freed us. Young people across Africa marched in peace, carrying pictures of Amina, the little girl Traoré spoke about. Her name became a symbol. Even schools used his speech as a reading lesson. Burkina Faso declared a national day of dignity. But most powerful of all, Traoré didn't go back to a throne. He went home. To walk through his mother's village barefoot, to thank the people who stood, to remind them, this victory is yours. Even Donald Trump days later said during a press briefing, I don't agree with him, but I respect him. He stood his ground. The final clip, Traoré standing as the crowd chanted, "We are not afraid," became the most replayed moment in African YouTube history. My brothers and sisters, if this story touched your heart, if it made you cry, if it reminded you what real leadership looks like, please like this video. Drop a comment with just one word, respect, and hit that subscribe button, not just for content, but for a movement. Because stories like this, they don't end. They begin with you.